So good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Yeah, there is an issue with technology, but somehow we managed to everything. Okay, so this is our second webinar series lecture, and we have very distinguished scholar, Professor Ines Zupanov. Many of you must be knowing her from our work. She has been visiting India, stayed in India for a long time, and she is familiar with India and Indian society. So, and at the outset, Ines, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and delivering this lecture on Zoom. So, Professor Ines would be today speaking on From Error to Sainthood, Jesuit Missionary Communicative Setting in the 16th century, India. So I'm sure you will enjoy this lecture. So after the lecture, there will be a discussion. So please stay till the end and respond to Professor Ines' lecture. So I request Dr. Varghese, my colleague, to introduce Professor Ines. Varghese.
Thank you, Professor Bangia. Before introducing today's speaker, let me tell you that there will be a discussion after Professor Ines's talk. Please use the raise hand option virtually in Zoom to ask your question, and also you can use the chat option to ask the question, and both in Zoom as well as in YouTube, so that someone else can actually ask your question. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Ines G. Zupanov, today's speaker. She is a senior research fellow at Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, which is National Center for Scientific Research in Paris. I don't know whether I have pronounced it correctly. And currently she is at the Center for Social Studies and Humanities in Delhi, which is CH. She was born in Zagreb, the Croatian city, where she did her education till graduation, and she got graduated in comparative literature and Indology from the University of Zagreb in the early 1980s, I suppose, or late 70s.
Right? Late 70s.
Late 70s, I'm sorry, yeah. And in 1984, she moved to the University of California, Berkeley, and completed her master's in Asian studies. And subsequently, she did her PhD also from Berkeley, and her PhD was completed in 1991. She is a permanent research fellow at the National Center for Scientific Research in Paris from 1999 onwards, and she has taught in various places. Most of her teaching was in the School for Advanced Studies in Social Sciences, which is known as UoH, located again in the French capital. But also she taught in short stints in various places, in many places, which includes the University of California, Berkeley, Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, etc. And she also held a number of fellowships in various places, which includes the School of Oriental and African Studies, London, and the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai. And as I said, she's currently away from her parent institute and is at the Center for Social Sciences and Humanities in Delhi. And she has got, an amazing corpus of work, particularly with regard to the early missionary engagement with India, which has been published as articles, edited anthologies, but perhaps three books stands out. The first of these, first among them was, of course, this book called The Disputed Mission, Jesuit Experiments and Brahminical Knowledge in the 17th Century India, published in 1999 by the Oxford University Press. And 6 years later, in 2005, she has got her second important book, which is Missionary Tropics, Catholic Frontier in India, 16th and 17th century, which was brought by the University of Michigan Press. And both these work basically, complicates the missionary encounter with the Orient and actually tell us how complex it was, how far it was from a unidirectional encounter, and how it was a relationship of mutuality, etc. And the recent book is, of course, the one she has co-authored with Angela Barreto Savior, which is known as, which is entitled Catholic Orientalism, which again push basically the idea of Orientalism back to the Portuguese time and how complex that, sharing of knowledge and the construction of Orient. And I mean, we are delighted to have such a speaker with a wide variety of interests as well as publication. She has her grip over sources is amazing. In fact, the kind of sources she used for her work, written in Portuguese, Italian, Spanish, Latin, Tamil, English, and there may be more perhaps. And she's proficient in all these languages and was making use of these sources. So today she's going to speak about the Jesuit, missionary communicative setting in India in the 16th century, by particularly looking at one particular missionary, namely Rodolfo Acquaviva, right? So now it's over to Professor Zupanov. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I wish I were there in person. I really love Hyderabad. But yeah, the circumstances are such that we are all prisoners. So we are speaking from the prisons, and these are my prison notes. Okay, so let me start immediately with the title. I use the concept of communicative setting. It could have been also communication setting in the title, but I could have also just as easily used communicative or communication competence or even communicative performance, because what I'm going to talk about today by actually presenting a very concrete case study addresses a larger question of intercultural understanding and misunderstanding, obviously, in general, and against a very specific historical background that were Jesuit evangelizing missions in the early modern world, in the early modern global world. So my interest is to zoom in on one Jesuit missionary life. I'm interested in lives in general, individual lives, rather than structures, in order to discern the communicative or semiotic moves that led him to where he was heading. And ideally, all Jesuit missionary was heading or was supposed to desire to be martyred or faith. And this Jesuit missionary actually succeeded. So the Jesuit hagiographies that I had to consult to do my research unmistakably smothered, compressed this Jesuit life, molded it into particular mold. In fact, that is what all hagiographies do. They smother life narratives and thus fabricate saints or martyrs through this indispensable miraculous embroideries and heroic acts. Unfortunately, for the 16th century, century, all the documents and archives I use are European, in Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, and Latin. It is only in the 17th century, actually, that the archives in other languages, such as Konkani, Persian, Tamil, and even Sanskrit, refer to the Jesuit presence in India. But very often the writers of these documents are Europeans, are Jesuits themselves, right? So in fact, it was only by the end of the 17th century that Goan Christians, in particular Brahmins and Sharodosh, these two important elite Christian groups, started writing about themselves and the world they inhabit. And they, in most cases, chose to write in Portuguese language. You can ask me why, but it's obvious. They were part of the Portuguese Empire. From the 16th century onwards, luckily, critical opinions and reports on Jesuits appeared by Protestant travelers. And there is, so they give us another perspective. And there is also a recently discovered Persian text, Majalis-i Jahangiri by Abdul Sattar ibn Qasim Lahori, who mentioned and criticized beautifully and strongly Jesuits at the court of the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. Now, the story I'm going to paint for you today is taken from, as I said, European documents, mostly letters and treatises Jesuits wrote from and about their mission. But I'm going to try to read them against the grain. I know this is not a very fancy expression anymore, but it's still very useful. And I am going to try to read the space, really geographically speaking. I may not succeed. And this is why I prefer to talk about communicative setting rather than communicative performance, because the space itself, or let's call it theater of actions and counteractions, and its rugged terrain, social and physical, impacted directly on certain historical attested outcomes of the story I'm going to tell. So this is my proposition of how to work against hagiographies. This is a project against hagiographies, which we can call today, in our new parlance, fake news of political propaganda. That's what hagiographies are about. And to restore, I want to restore a different perspective on the events that took place. Today in Goa, there is a media campaign directed against Christian minority by the Hindu nationalists, and it is played out in the field of history and historical facts. So Goan Christians and Portuguese are castigated for cruel treatment of Goans who were and appear to be still just that, victims of oppression and who suffered a lot. And so they want to go back and find their pristine Hindu Goa back, a pure Hindu Goa. Now, a lot of misguided facts are fabricated to make Goa purely Hindu. And I've been recently listening to YouTube and podcasts about Goan Inquisition and really rolling my eyes, but realized also that Christian hagiographic literature has been partly responsible for providing fodder to the anti-Christian attacks of today, and that it indeed celebrated and celebrates violence against non-Christians. So in the second part of my presentation, I will address the issue of violence, which was itself a kind of communicative performance. So let me piece together for you a short meteor life of Rodolfo Acquaviva, Neapolitan from Naples, right? Nobleman and a Jesuit who inhabited one after another two exemplary communicative settings, placed on the opposite side of the Jesuit missionary spectrum. The first one, a courtly missionary, communicative setting, and the second, a rural communicative setting. Can I have another slide? Yes. Acquaviva's first missionary experience at the age of 30 was the Mughal Court, where he was part-time Portuguese ambassador and part-time learned religious specialist of the law of Isa, as they called it. So his next assignment upon return to Goa 3 years later was very short, in fact, just a few days, And it was in the rural and borderland Portuguese territory of Goa on the Salsette Peninsula, where resistance to Jesuits and to Portuguese tax collectors, more than anything else, was brewing. Now, the two pictorial traditions, you can identify them, of course, see them in front of you, Mughal and Catholic, let's say, summarize and highlight the two major events in these two communicative settings in which Aqua Viva took place. Aqua Viva's life took place, or Aqua Viva, yes, physically took place. You can see it for yourself, and I don't have to remind you of the difference in communicative style that is taking place in these two pictures. Aqua Viva is represented in both, in two very different poses. He is the one sitting closer to Akbar on the left-hand side, on the miniature, Mughal miniature, and he is the one on his knees in the second one. Can I have another picture? Wait a second. I don't think this is the right one. No. Yeah, okay. Go back, please. Go back. Yeah, okay, that's a good one. So in the first picture, very famous one, we see Mughal Emperor Akbar holding a religious assembly in his Ibadat Khane in Fatehpur Sikri. And the two men dressed in black are Jesuit missionaries. The one, as I said, closer to Akbar is Rodolfo Acquaviva. And another one, there's still a bit of uncertainty who he was. It may have been Francisco Enriquez, or more probably, I think, Antonio de Montserrat. Now, all three of them Jesuits, but Acquaviva and Montserrat were the senior Jesuits and like a real Jesuits. This is one of the incredible miniatures that illustrated the Akbarnama. And this one was painted by Narsingh between 1603 and 1605, I think. Yeah. And this famous interfaith debates in Ibadat Khane started in 1575, as you probably all know, and went on for a couple of years. And this picture refers to a moment between 1580, when the Jesuits arrived, and 1581. This is the time when the Jesuits were invited to join in, and then the discussions anyway petered out. Now, most of the interesting details about this mission came from the treatise called Commentarius, or Commentary in Latin, of the Jesuit, of the second Jesuit, Antonio de Montserrat. This is a very fine treatise that he wrote, actually in captivity in Africa, okay? And he provided a lot of details of what was going on at the Mughal court during the first Jesuit mission. Now, Persian sources have almost nothing to say about the first mission. You can see, unlike the second mission that received ample attention. So you can see this is the inscription on the miniature running on top. And I think this is the richest reference to Acquaviva in Persian sources. Next picture, please. So the second picture in the church that I took picture of in the church in Kolva in Goa is the famous scene of a massacre of Acquaviva and his companions in the village of Kunkolim that occurred on July 15th, 1583. Now, Acquaviva was immediately recognized as a martyr. He was, in fact, he had all the signs of martyrhood material. He was 33. His wounds resembled Christ's and were taken for signs of special election and divine merit. And although his canonization process took time, and his canonization process and the canonization process of his four companions, and it ended only in 1893, and they were beatified, not yet saints. Nevertheless, he figures in Jesuit hagiographical literature and martyrologies as one of the most famous Indian martyrs. So for the purpose of this presentation, I will try to peel off the layers of Catholic praise and glorification that were woven through the story from the first Jesuit to understand just how Acquaviva performed in his mission and how he managed his communicative tasks. Well, I think he failed. This is interesting, you know, failure is a success, you know. Well, I think he failed because in both settings he was blind. And apparently, according to Montserrat's description, Acquaviva wore glasses and apparently he misplaced them all the time. So physically and socially, his communication performance was somewhat impaired. He was so spiritual, said Montserrat, that he was constantly distracted by mundane things that he could not handle. So next picture, please. Yeah, next. Okay. It's not a very good picture, but what can we do? Oh, wait a second. I think this is not the right one. The one before. Can you? No, before. Yes, that one. So that one is not a very good picture, but actually what he's holding in his right hand are glasses. And obviously this is a tradition, this is a Mughal tradition that captured those glasses on a couple of pictures while, okay, and can you go now to the next picture? No, wait, you're not on, yeah, that is the one where he holds glasses in his right hand. It's not very well done, visible, but then go to the next slide. Yeah, this is the slide that I have just found on, because I was looking for the glasses representation. I just found it on internet, and this is on sale at Christie's with a notice saying a Jesuit missionary, Mughal India, late 16th century, and it can be nobody else but Acquaviva. And so, but in any case, I mean, obviously Mughal painters were interested in Acquaviva's glasses more than in his face, because here you have a face that could have been anybody. We don't know if this is Acquaviva's face. On the other hand, look, can I have a next slide, please? Yeah, Catholic heroes are never portrayed with glasses. You know, they cannot, you know, they cannot, they have to be portrayed as perfect in body and, let's say, even good looking. And okay, you went further. Can you go back? Yeah, yes, that was the one. They have to be, you know, portrayed always as healthy in body. Their eyes would often be painted as if looking upwards, or let's say inwards, and their bodies would be positioned in a kind of humble expectation of martyrhood. Okay, Acquaviva was then, I mean, I'm now adding a little bit, I added a couple of metaphors, was blind and slow in grasping the distinctions and differences that had to be managed, accommodated, and not rejected outright, which he did. And he was kind of a rigorist and thought that differences have to be refuted, expunged, rather than contained in some other way. And it is possible that with Islam, there was a long tradition of dialogic, very insulting refutations. And thus Acquaviva was probably stuck in a prefabricated model of conversation, not as insulting because that he was he was at the Mughal court. But so therefore, accommodation for which the Jesuits in South India, of which I have written quite a lot of text, are famous for, was not practiced and probably not possible among Muslims and under the Muslim kings. Now, from about 8 letters that we have written by Akbarviva in those 3 years from the Mughal mission to Goa and to his superiors, we see that he spent his time debating, and he learned some Persian, apparently, in the Mughal court, in the Mughal emperor's Akbar's special club, the Ibadat Khane, and the topics were the usual stuff. There's nothing special about them, showing that Muhammad was a false prophet, that he wrote false scriptures or law, and that he created false sect. There's no surprises here. But he also tried to do something else. This is my point, I guess, particular point. And he tried to do something else which is much more Jesuitical, in a sense that it is quite well described in the Jesuit founding texts and in the correspondence of the founding fathers, and became prescription of also of how to deal with outsiders whom one wants to convert. He tried to establish a personal, emotional communion with Akbar. The success of which he was convinced would also establish the Catholic emotional community. I'm using here Barbara Rosenwein's notion because I think that it may be useful to discuss conversion in terms of affects. That is, conversion was always about, I'm quoting, learning to feel like others in the community. So Akbarviva steered the mission at the Mughal court to drilling psychologically only one person. He focused only on one person, and that is Akbar. And in his letters, he reads Akbar's responses and focuses on Akbar's reactions. He's talking about, did Akbar love us or love me or not? And the intimacy Akbar showed, and Jesuits were very happy about it, by coming to their church and participating in various festivities like church functions and marriages, was for the Jesuits proof that what they have with Akbar was love and friendship, in particular, love and friendship between Akbar and Akbarviva. So next, can I have next slide? Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide is a map. It would be good to have it, but okay, I don't know. Yeah, is that it? Yes, that's it, thank you. So just to remind you where the Mughal court was at that time, it was in Fatehpur Sikri, of course, which is 2,000 kilometers away from Goa. Takes a couple of weeks to get there on a mule. So what Akbarviva told Akbar was, literally, according to one of his letters, I came all the way for you. It's really a love statement. It was, in fact, it was one of the strategies, quite basic and typical of emotional blackmail the Jesuits employed in all missions. But the Jesuits wrote in their final letters before leaving the mission the following: Akbar did not bite. So see what I mean? It was a bait. This kind of love and friendship was also a bait. Can I have another new slide? Yeah, this is a site of Fatehpur Sikri today. I told you I was really wanted to understand geography of the places where the Jesuits were, because this is a communicative setting. So I also went to Fatehpur Sikri too. I'll tell you later what I found. So this is Fatehpur Sikri today, Google Maps, and we know that the Jesuits first lodged outside of the walls, and then got a better place inside. As Akbarviva became closer to Akbar, he was actually given a kind of better place and closer place to be able to get to Akbar's chambers. Now, there is no precise indication, unfortunately, in Jesuit letters where these living quarters were at the time. And I was thinking that maybe I could sense it when I was in Fatehpur Sikri, but no way. Next picture, please. Yeah, and this is Ibadat Ibadat Khane. So I also wanted to find out where this place was, but I was unable to locate Ibadat Khane either, and didn't read the books that I should have read when I was there to be able to see that there was a huge dispute and a huge debate about whether it was placement was found or not. Apparently, it has been identified already in 1980s and then rediscovered. There is a quarrel over it. I'm not going to go into that. In 2001, on a mound between Jodhbai Palace and Jama Masjid. But the remains are difficult to find and they are not indicated and probably cordoned off. So that's why I couldn't even get there. And I refer to you to the book written by Syed Ali Nidam Rezavi, Fatihpur Sikri Revisited, published in 2013, to look at that. And I thank Shahid Jamal, who may be in the audience, for providing me with that reference. Now, apparently the miniature from Akbarnama with the screen wall of foliated blind arches was crucial in identifying the place. So I leave it to you to see whether you are convinced. But that apparently, this particular miniature was important for identifying the placement of Ibadat Khane. Now, if Aquaviva and Montserrat did not provide enough information to identify these geographical locations, they, on the other hand, did capture, I think, well, Akbar's emotional states, or that's what they thought that they captured well, or they captured well for us reading their letters and the treatise of Montserrat. So, for example, Akbar's amusement at Christian rituals, his admiration of books and paintings. This is, you probably already know that. And I think they also captured Akbar's emotional attachment to Aquaviva, which was mostly couched in the vassalage idiom. It was not love, sentimental love. It was about hierarchy, vassalage, service. But there was no communion or community. There was no emotional community. And Aquaviva was also profoundly perplexed by Akbar's concept or precept of sulhi-kul, peace to all, which ran against the Jesuit concept of Christian love and charity, which is intolerant to difference. So this is one of the reasons Aquaviva abandoned the project after 3 years, not even 3 years. And there were other reasons, political reasons. I'm not going to go into that either. And there were some personal reasons. Aquaviva was simply not emotionally prepared to fail. This was against his aristocratic, this is my opinion, you can criticize me for this, but against his aristocratic ethos and heroic habitus. He had to win, and even by reinterpreting failure as a winning point. So there is something else that is at play and crucial in these communicative situations, but had to be cut short. The language acquisition of Jesuits. Aquaviva did not learn Persian well enough to debate and maybe to seduce Akbar, but luckily he understood the importance of linguistic training. And this is something that he actually brought with him to Goa and basically told his brethren in Goa that we have to learn those languages, and not just Persian, Hindustani language as well. So next picture. Okay, this is just a picture postcard to say that the first mission to the Mughal court left no archaeological traces, but the third mission that started in 1595, which lasted until 1773, left quite a few, and even churches and cemetery, and you can go there. But at the time of Akbar, at that particular time, Akbar moved his court to Agra. So these are the pictures from the Agra mission. And these objects show very little accommodation. Some architectural borrowing, yes, but no accommodation. Next picture, please. So, next, yes. So Acquaviva returned to Goa in 1583 in May, and he died or was killed in July 1583, when he was taken on a tour of Salsette region in southern Goa. So here you have a map of the Estado de India. I put in the borders with Salsette region in the south, in the small circle, and the Kunkolim in a small circle. So Salsette region is the southern region, and Kunkolim is in the small circle. So here, Acquaviva had to face, although he was not even probably aware of the important difference compared to he was not yet aware compared to the difference between the Mughal court that he just left in his cognitive short-sightedness that he obviously always carried with him, that this was a very different communication or communicative setting. After a courtly communication, Acquaviva had to face the rural world. And reports about the scuffle with the villagers of Kunkolim are precise in their detail, but they really lack larger context. So I pieced the context from other different documents describing the situation in Salsette at that particular moment, just before this massacre, let's say, before this event on July 15. And I used some other documents, mostly actually land registers called tombos and forais in Portuguese. Most of them now basically rotting in, in the archives of Goa because they are not preserved as they should be, and they are incredible for rural historian. There's really a fantastic documentation to study this part of India. And so these documents actually started being collected and put down on paper by the Portuguese Estado de India from 1526 onwards. And so these are also my documents that I used for this part of my presentation. And I also use, I am guilty as charged, but that's what we do. I use later ethnographies, of course. So I'm not saying this is not supposed to be, we should not supposed to do that. Historians, ethnographies are important for our kind of reverse engineering of the situation. Okay, if courtly setting was complicated, so was the rural. Portuguese administration trying to get as much as possible revenues, that's what those revenue books are about, from the land. And then the Jesuits who directly profited from the lands belonging to the temples, which were mostly destroyed, were on the collision course, direct collision course with rural communities, especially with, of course, rural elites called gaunkars, the so-called regional early settlers, who were draining taxes and profits from the land before the Portuguese. So this is really elites who were targeted by the Portuguese and Jesuit appropriation of resources. So Acquaviva and 4 other Jesuits stumbled into the situation in which violence exploded, perhaps also because of the possession ceremony that took place in front of the temple in Kunkolim. That's one theory. And that got out of hand. And Acquaviva was probably the least guilty of any kind of hostility towards the people who killed him. But some other Jesuits who were in his group, those 4 other Jesuits, were known to have been involved in very violent earlier temple destruction. We're talking about a month or 2 earlier destruction spree by some of these people who were with him. Can I have the next picture? Next, please. Okay, so as I said, okay, as I said, the province on Salsette, which also means 66 villages, was also a frontier region bordering with Bijapur, far from the city of Tisvari, or from the island of Tisvari, as it is called, where Panjim is today. And it was a major junction with the southern Kannada region. This is where actually the post was going, the postal service was working between, was passing through between Goa and Cochin. So the Martyred Party went principal church in Rashol through Margao. I think you can, I put some, yes, I put them, through Margao down south to pacify the southern region. You can see the train of, I mean, you can see the direction of how this all happened, all in 3 days. And the point of the expedition of all these Jesuits who first gathered in Rashol, the seminary of Rashol, then went to Margao, slept over, and then went down south through the Orlim village, was to show around the new rector of the College of Margao, Rodolfo Acquaviva, his new constituency. This was his new communicative setting. He was going to be the boss of this new territory. So next, please. Can I have next map? Next slide, please. This is probably the most important slide, so please make it happen. Okay, yeah. If I can have a next slide, that would be good, because this is a Google Map slide. I will show you of the area. Is it possible to have a Google Map? Next picture. Okay, I don't know if it's possible, but I can only tell you, then I will explain it to you what is so important about this Google Map slide, is that you can clearly see, or I can clearly see, that the terrain was interspersed with waterways. And this is why it was so difficult to move quickly and escape away. And it was a rainy season. This is May 15. The rain was there, and it is described. They described the showers, the very violent showers. It was a rainy season already, and the rivers and waterways were overflowing. So it was very difficult to move from one shore of the river to another. And this is probably no. Can you go back? Yes. No. Yes. That's it. Thank you. And it was so it was probably the most important fact. I mean, geographical fact. Finally, I come to my geographical fact. The reason why these people were killed and not just chased away. They could have run away, but in fact they couldn't, because they were stuck on a kind of an island, and they were unable to cross the river. Nobody ever knew how to swim anyway, which were overflowing. These rivers and rivulets were overflowing, and they were trapped and killed. So I don't know if you can see, but this is all water here. Okay, next slide. Yes. So now all Jesuits reports said that Jesuit principal or most important crime that triggered the rebellion of the people in Kunkulim was destruction of an anthill, which, as one of the reports said, the anthill is their pagoda. Now, pagoda in 16th century Portuguese means two things, coming from Bhagavati, though that's a different story, how the term was coined earlier, but it means both an idol and the temple. And this is why the villagers got really mad, apparently, since the Christians and the Jesuits killed a cow, smeared it with blood, smeared its blood, and actually stuffed the cow on top of an anthill. before they destroyed it. Can we see the next picture? It is just another anthill. And just to tell you that this is, you know, these anthills didn't go away. They were destroyed maybe in the 16th century, but they're still there. Okay, and next picture. Yeah, and this is the representation of massacre in the book called Admirabile Vida e Virtudes del Santo Martir Rodolfo Acquaviva from the 17th century. And you can see that the pictures in the Colva church that I took and you showed in the beginning is actually some kind of copy of this early representation. Now, an ex-historian, Teutonio de Souza, has offered an economic and social explanation of the event. Apparently, for him, Cuncolin was a temple, was a temple village and bazaar, important bazaar, located on the important north-south caravan route. And the local elites, Gaunkars, perceived the Christianization carried out by the Jesuits as direct menace to their economic privileges, linked to Mahadeva, that is to say Shiva temple, which was at the heart of the city and of the trade activities taking place under its auspices. Now, Rowena Robinson, a sociologist, has extended the discussion to the post-conversion history of King Cuncolim, in which the converted Gaunkars resumed both economic and cultural or cultic control in spite of Portuguese punishment. They did so by investing in confraternities, replacing the temple with the church, from which the earlier system of distinctions, because the church, the temple and then the church became the source of distinctions, honors, and so they just reinscribed the old honor system into the church, into the functioning of the church. And more recent interpretation by Angela Barreto Xavier, focusing on the very moment of the crisis and violence, suggesting that the trigger, if not cause, was the ritual possession that went bad. Thus, the Jesuit demonization of local deities mirrored the way Cuncolim religious specialists demonized the Jesuits. Just in the Mughal court, Rodolfo Acquaviva, who somewhat undeservedly plays a major role in the hagiographies or the Cuncolim martyrdom, had been drawn into the logic of local practices. And from fragmentary details provided by accounts by, for example, famous Jesuit Alessandro Valignano, his contemporaries, Sebastião Gonçalves, a famous historian, and Thomas Stevens, a famous writer in Konkani, Acquaviva was not, in fact, the leader of the Jesuit party. He did not know the local languages. It was his first visit to the region, and the complexity of rural setting was most probably still beyond his understanding. Acquaviva's error was that he went into the field completely uninformed, unprepared, careless in assessing the situation. But before the event, he had been peacefully, in one of the letters, somebody says that before the event, he had been peacefully reading canonical hours, again with his glasses on, instead of listening to the menacing voices of the possessed shaman. Now, the martyrdom of the 5 Jesuits was, in fact, a huge loss in terms of missionary personnel, since there were never more than 12 to 14 Jesuits at the time in the entire Salcid regions. Jesuits were always in small numbers. However, each missionary loss or error could be narrativized into hailing the advantages of such pious deaths. So even more than in the Mughal mission, the Cuncolim Acquaviva was, disoriented, short-sighted, and perhaps aware of that, so that offering his throat to be cut or whatever, pierced by the sword, which preserved and and confirmed his noble ambitions. Acquaviva's missionary life, if viewed from outside of the hagiographic narrative art constructed around it, but in fact filled with desperate gestures of a young, noble, and impatient Italian Jesuit. I wrote about on another Italian Jesuit who resembled this one, but not completely. And the happy ending in Martyrdom, which follows hagiographical logic, was probably more a failure at finding a better solution than a triumph. However, if the Jesuits failed to communicate their message of love, friendship, but of love, the Gaunkars of Kunkolin made a mistake as well, which cost them dearly their lives and the ownership of their land. They lost the ownership of the land for another 400 years. In spite of the gory details, which I didn't give you on purpose, and the violence that was perpetrated on both sides, in fact, Kunkolin villagers first, and then Portuguese. And in spite of visible, in the Jesuit letters, efforts at creating love relationships with the villagers, the interaction seemed to have been based on implicit coercion rather than persuasion and cultivation of friendship, as was the case at the Mughal court. So this particular communicative setting was already contaminated with unequal power relations. And this is because the Jesuits were part, and at times really unwillingly, of the official Portuguese administration in Salsette. And they did not think necessary to negotiate any contentious points expressed by the local rural and semi-military elites in southern Goa. And yet, as we know, in the period after martyrdom, this event did in fact produce an emotional community. This is the paradox, and did transform precisely those elites who perpetrated killings and who were punished in a horrible way afterwards into very strong Catholic community, which invested church structures from within and built their own Christian identity out of this event. They took over the Kunkolin Christians took over the fabricas or lay associations that manage church finances and maintenance, and they became principal organizers of major church festivals, and they replaced the temple with the church in order to fabricate their local honors and identity. On the other hand, in rural Goa, Jesuits and Franciscans learned an important lesson, that conversion cannot be effective without profound knowledge of the language of the people. And it is well known that after 1580s, the missionaries and parish priests learned Konkani and Marathi. In fact, one of the future important Christian writer, translator, Thomas Stevens, was one of the Jesuits who wrote a report on Kunkolin massacre. And his Christa Purana is a famous Christian work that inspired Christian devotion for centuries, even today. So through languages, Jesuits drilled into the heart of the Goan converts, and created a Catholic emotional community that still exists. But of course, also through language, Goans imprinted Catholicism with their own claims, demands, definitions, and literary styles. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. So in 2011, Salsette census, the Catholics in Salsette are the largest population in Goa. So they succeeded in a way. So the life of Rodolfo Acquaviva was really full of blunders and errors, and yet he arrived posthumously to the status of beatified martyr. His career, in which he switched from one communicative setting to another, had been recognized, in fact, as a blueprint for disaster. And from that time onwards, the Jesuits preferred to assign missionaries to one mission in which they could specialize, and they could specialize in that one language and cultivate one local cultural idiom. And these will be called accommodationist missions, where Jesuits were to avoid martyrdom at all costs and instead work hard to create a community. Okay, and the last slide. So I did not discuss the gory details, but you can have a lot of gory details in the article that I published in this book, Catholic Missionaries in Early Modern Asia, Patterns of Localization, published in 2020, so fresh out of print. And if you want a PDF, send me an email. So that's it. I have finished.
Bangya?
Okay, yeah, I could unmute. Thank you so much, Ines. It's a wonderful lecture. You have taken the longest stretch and explained us how the Jesus missionary set up its a missionary successfully in Goa. So and the kind of sources he used, means the Mughal paintings and hagiographic texts, really very, very interesting. So I'm sure audience would have a lot of questions. So there is a chat box, and the audience can put their questions in the chat box, and Ines, you can go one by one from the chat box, if you can see the chat box.
Oh.
Varghese.
They can also ask the question directly. There is an option called raise hand in Zoom. So use that option and directly ask question. And those who are, those who want to ask a question by writing, use the chat box. Yeah.
There are too many things going on in the chat box. I don't know where to start.
But can I ask you something before that?
Yeah.
I mean, Professor Zupanov, this is fascinating. You were juxtaposing two communicative setting, one, the courtly communicative setting of the Mughal Court, and obviously the other one being the rural but elite, communicative setting in Goa. But then, as you rightly said, I mean, specifically speaking, Akwa Viva was a failure, but then his success started from there, right? So I just, this is just a curiosity. I want to know, what does these hagiographies actually say, right? And what is the kind of circulation of this, hagiography? So for instance, what is in my mind is, of course, Shahid Amin's book of Qasimian, where he get killed, but in the Persian chronicles and the hagiographies are completely silent about it.
Yeah.
And his life was reinvented from the local oral folk tales.
Yeah.
So I'm particularly interested, because you said that following his murder, there was an emotional community coming up, which obviously contributed to the making of the Catholic community over there. So I'm just curious to know the kind of circulation, the locations, the sources, how it actually happens. Thank you.
Yeah, you would have to see. I was studying official Jesuit hagiographies. I was not studying local folklore, local take on Unkalim, because I'm not an anthropologist. I don't know Konkani, so that's beyond what I can do. But you can look at. I'm sure you can find a lot of different versions of this event. And as I said, there is today in Goa a particular revival of re-Hinduization. And so there are a lot of phony, I mean, a lot of stories that circulate about cruelty of the Jesuits and of everybody, completely uninformed about the facts, because I could give them great facts about cruelty of the Jesuits, but they are inventing their own. They have their own idea of how cruelties work, So it's fabrications basically. But local population, of course, and it would be better to look at and maybe ask Rowena Robinson. Her first book was talking about it. It's a long time ago, and right now there's a bunch of very smart Goan intellectuals all over the world, and they are, reflecting on this from all sides. So it's not anymore my field. I cannot be there. So my article that I published, as this is I'm using this occasion to promote my last published article. I'm only working on Jesuit sources, because I think they need to be worked properly. And I think that the story is well, I mean, whatever they say, I pieced it together from different, because there is no one, I pieced it together. And actually, hagiography is written about this, the life of Acquaviva, also pieced together, were pieced together from these earlier sources, but were already some kind of selection of what they wanted to say. So they weeded out certain uncomfortable facts and events. So in a way, I was trying to produce something which is history rather than memory and rather than hagiography. I always plead for history, but it's not so easy, because memory, I mean, we all use all these materials, and to find the right kind of tone to talk about massacres is very difficult, and especially the two massacres, because first you have a massacre of Jesuits, and then you have a massacre of Kunkolim headmen. I can't remember the number, but 16 Kunkolim headmen were invited to talk to the military encampment that was in the area. They got in and they killed them all, except one, to tell the story to the others. So they, literally decapitated all Gaunkars of the Kunkolim region. So it was really very bloody. And not to mention that this kind of, I said that this party was pacifying party. In the party of these 5 Jesuits, there were about 60 Christians, and then a couple of soldiers running around, and there was a military encampment. So as they went, in fact, they were destroying anthills, temples. Sometimes the soldiers would also destroy crops of those who were not Christians. And there was a lot of violence. So, violence was responded with violence. And so I wanted to have this violence somehow under control by having facts. And I went to the first primary sources possible. They are also not perfect, but I reconstructed on the primary sources that were like the first produced on it. Of course, where there are no other sources available. We have later memory, but the prima vista, the first sight, there's none. That's a problem of being a historian.
Yes. Ines, could you pick up something from the chat box? There is a question: were the dwellings of the lower echelons of the society significant marker of transaction between the circulating Jesuits and the inhabitants? That's one question. Did you get it?
I cannot get it. There are so many questions. Please, can you ask me one by one, and maybe somebody can read it, because I cannot.
There is one question by Prapti Panda. Can you elaborate on the Jesuits' relationship? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on the Jesuits' relationship with the administrative system of the Estado? Was there a discord between faith and empire?
Yeah. No, that is a good question. Of course, yes, there was. Of course, there was. But
Can you elaborate a little bit? That's what.
yeah, I can elaborate. Now, Salsette region was belatedly annexed to Goa only in 45, I think. So this was the time when Bardes and Tisvadi were already, were already Portuguese for half a century, almost, less than half a century, but here. So Salsette, and which is a much bigger territory also, was the Portuguese, the Portuguese did not have the capacity, administrative capacity to administer the whole territory. They had soldiers, but soldiers were used for other things, for predatory battles down the Malabar coast, for ships full of spices or something. They were not really pacifying they did not have the capacity, administrative and military, to pacify those territories. And these territories were not yet Christianized. I mean, if I remember correctly, at the time of this event, there were like maybe 50,000 non-Christians. 50,000 people on Salsette, and only 3,000 were Christians. So the rest of the population was not yet Christian. So this was, Jesuits were used by the state, Estado de India, it's not state, but the Estado administration, to go in and first convert everybody and then make them meek and obedient, and then we can come in and basically take taxes from the land, and also take their land. Why not? In that respect, Jesuits were doing the dirty job of the colonialists. But Goa is a colonial society. So here the Jesuits were very close to the Estado. And also they were at the mercy of the Estado because, Portuguese king was paying for them. This is their patronage, royal patronage came that the Portuguese king acquired from Rome, came with the bill of things that he had to pay for the upkeep of the missionaries, Jesuits in particular. So yes, they were closer to Estado, but Jesuit missionaries were not close to Estado in all the other missions that were outside of Estado's control. And that is where what I call accommodationist missions had much more success, and were actually the only way to practice conversion was to do something else. But missionaries were not in any way administrators of the, and it had less to do with economy, and especially the rural economy.
Okay.
So I don't know. Yeah.
Just again connected to this, another question from Opera Gamle.
Opera, yes, sir.
I'm reading this. How would you describe the Jesuit interreligious communicative attitude to that of Akbar and his court, and Bar are the Konkani rural chieftains? Did you get?
Yes, I am trying to
Down in the chat box as well. You can see in the chat box down.
Well, Ofira, I'm not quite sure that I can get the picture of what you want me to say, but these are, as I was trying to explain, these two communicative settings were really very different. And Konkani rural chieftains had, at this particular point, nobody was asking them to be friends of Jesuits. They in fact, Jesuits did not even see the necessity to talk to them, and this is why they were killed. And also, the rural chieftains had no, they had no power compared to Akbar. Jesuits were at the Mughal court, I said ambassadors and spiritual leaders, whatever, but they were also some kind of hostages. Akbar could have, do away with them as he did away with those he didn't agree with. And at one point, in fact, this is why they left. There were hostilities in Gujarat and Surat and whatever, and the Jesuits are really scared that if the war between Portuguese and Akbar start, they will be really hostages. So the relationship is not the same. The rural chieftains were at this particular moment really, under Portuguese rule, and the Jesuits didn't even need to talk to them or didn't even feel that, they have to accommodate to them either, or that they have to use some kind of special strategies that you use with royal or courtly people.
There is another question from Prati Panda. The question is, can you elaborate on the Jesuits' relationship with the administrative system of the Estado? Was there a discord between faith and empire?
I thought I answered that. Yes, there was. I mean, again, in Goa, you wouldn't see that much, but everywhere else, in Japan, in Malacca, in China, in Madurai Mission, in Mysore Mission, along the, even in Kerala, the Jesuits were in a completely different situation, and they were not, and they really didn't want to be seen as part of Portuguese administration. It went all the way, to give you another example, is Madurai Mission that I studied, where Roberto Nobili basically said, I'm not Portuguese, which was true, he was Italian, and he used the word for Portuguese is parangi, the word firangi, yeah. I'm not Portuguese, I am Roman, I'm Roman Raja, and I am Roman Brahmin. Raja because I'm aristocrat, and Brahmin because I'm learned. And the word Brahmin comes from the Sanskrit root to learn, brr, but apparently that etymology is quite fanciful. So, so depending on where they were, they were not necessarily part of administration. And actually, if you look at the Jesuits all over the world, because at this moment, they were already all over the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in China, well, not yet. Japan, they were there in 1580s. They were never, their mission goal would never be sacrificed for the sake of Portuguese Empire. In fact, nobody liked Portuguese Empire. Jesuits did not necessarily like Portuguese Empire, although there were Portuguese Jesuits who were a bit, divided. Their allegiances were a bit divided. Also, according to the rules of Jesuit order, their allegiance could be only one, and that is to the Pope, and not to the king. So no. Jesuits were not part of.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to be part of the. Yeah.
Ines, there is another question.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is from Navanit Krishnan. Is asking, can you explain about Jesuit printing press in Goa? Rachol, we put it in question mark.
Yeah, there was a, yeah.
Illustration in the printed books and also the manuscripts and codices. Yeah.
Okay, so yes, there is still a doubt whether it's not quite clear. The printing press arrived to Goa in 1560, right? And there appear to be not lay, not secular printing press, but a printing press in Goa. And then there was a printing press in Rachol. I'm not quite sure whether this was the same machine, whether this was the same. I did not work enough on that. But I can tell you something else, that there was a printing press at this particular moment in 1579 in Cochin, okay? And the Jesuit, very important Jesuit texts were being printed in Tamil, in Cochin, two important texts, actually one in Cochin, one in Koilom, because those presses were moving. And there was one press in Punaikayal in the Gulf of Mannar, close to Tuticorin. So depending on, Jesuits were trying to introduce the press, and then of course Rachel had a press a little bit later. There was also a press at one particular point in Ambalakadu in Kerala, but I haven't really worked on that. You would have to find somebody more, because Goan printing press has something to do also with Goan literature, with Krista Purana, with all this stuff. And there are so many people who are now more competent than me, like Ananya Chakraborty, Stuart McManus, and many others. So I don't want to get onto terrain that I am not controlling perfectly.
Okay. There is another question, Ines, from Chitran. Are there accounts that relate to Jesuits' encounter with the local administrative structures within the geographical zone of Mughal Empire? If so, were these relations smooth or Ines?
You know what? I didn't get the first part for some reason. I was distracted. What was the beginning? What did you say? Okay. Are there accounts that relate to Jesuit?
Are there accounts that relate to Jesuit encounters with local administrative structures within the geographical zone of Mughal Empire? If so, were these relations smooth? I couldn't get that.
Local zone of Mughal Empire. Their accounts that relate to I cannot really answer that either, but I must have the book somewhere here. There is one document written by one Jesuit, but this is a second Mughal Jesuit mission by Jerome Xavier, this more famous Jesuit who actually wrote a lot of stuff in Persian and about the mission, and he is the real hero of the Mughal mission. And he wrote one manuscript that has recently been published, which is very strange because it is attributed to him, but the manuscript is about Mughal structure, Mughal accounts, Mughal system of honors and zat and all this stuff. So, and it's a very important account. So the Jesuits obviously were interested in how the Mughal Empire works, how it, what is the structure from inside of this political machine, very powerful political machine that also had to deal with a lot of managing people and territories and money and all this stuff. So I know of this one text. I will find the book published by Jorge Flores. If you know his name, I mean, he is the one who actually found the text and published it. I think the text is in British Library, and I forgot how the name. Sorry.
Yeah, there is another question from Ananya Anthony.
Yes.
Were Catholic missionaries, particularly the Carmelites, allowed to spread their religion under the Dutch?
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. There was an initial deal between the Carmelites and the Dutch, because I don't know if you know the story, probably you know when you ask this question, is that Dutch Carmelites replaced Jesuits in the mission, St. Thomas Christian Mission, and Dutch replaced, or rather chased out, Portuguese. So there was in the beginning a kind of a deal between the Dutch and the Carmelites. Carmelites were not under Portuguese Padroado. They were part of Propaganda Fide. In Propaganda Fide, so Rome, right? Rome, who taught at one point, actually around 1580s, that the Portuguese are really doing a bangle job with conversion, and that it should not be their job to convert, but rather Rome should be in that business. But it was too late because they already gave those permissions to the Portuguese kings and Portuguese and Spanish king, the padroado, the right of patronage of missions. So Propaganda Fide was coming off through the smaller doors, and Carmelites were the religious order, Catholic religious order, that was selected to precisely go and counter or take over missions that were either abandoned or impossible to manage by Padroado missionaries. And Jesuits were not able to do anything anymore in around Cochin and in the background because the Dutch were there. So Carmelites came in and made a deal with the Dutch. And especially there was one particular Carmelite who was also a botanical special. He was actually, he could draw botanical specimens and that kind of stuff. And he worked with one of the Dutch amateur Van Gede, not an amateur, very famous botanist, let's say. He worked with him, made all kinds of stuff, and was allowed to build a church, a Carmelite church within Dutch territory. So, yeah.
I'm just looking at the chart.
I think it's no more. Yeah, there is a question from Bivita. There's a question from Bivita. You sure?
Yeah,
so considering,
can you read out?
Yeah, there is a question from Bivita Isho. The question is, considering the communication as inherent to imagine a community, doesn't the failure to become an emotional community owe to the immunitarian paradigm ingrained in the Christian missions? That is, was communication just a means to build a rational consensus, which is predominantly Catholic Christian in nature, and not a process of communing with another, be it Islam or local communities?
Okay, so we historians, especially of this 16th century, 17th century, we don't have enough sources to actually go into and ask this kind of questions. This is a kind of a question where you would have to have much richer sources from both sides. So I'm doing only what I can do on the basis of documents I have. I identify certain aspects. It would be absolutely, yes, good to know if I could do what you are suggesting. I will think about it, but rational consensus, we are not yet in that. Also, your question is full of concepts which are kind of difficult to apply to 16th century because the sources are taking us in different directions, and we have to read them with as much sensitivity to what they are telling us in their idiom. So we cannot force on them certain categories that are a bit too later, a bit too 19th century.
Okay.
Okay. So should we end or can we take more questions?
Yeah, there is one at the end. The Portuguese had followed a pattern of sacred symbolic location.
Okay, so there is a practical question for the young generation of people who are trying to study the period from Santosh Abraham. The question is, this is regarding the archival data that you have used. I assume that more of such data was in Old Portuguese. What advice or suggestion that you could make to the students who would like to work on Portuguese archival sources in India?
And by they have to learn Portuguese. But I would suggest that, first of all, try to find archives that are not in Portuguese. I would like to look for those. And, I was telling you about these Tombush and Forais, the land registers. They are in the archive in Goa. Good luck with that. But they are not all in Portuguese. So they are in Konkani or Marathi. They can be in various languages. And this is why Portuguese historians cannot read them. They can read certain, but they cannot read others. Why isn't anybody working on that? Well, maybe this language was a little bit difficult. It's not the language of today's Konkani or today's Marathi. Even the Portuguese that I read is not today's Portuguese. It's actually, sometimes I don't even know whether it's Portuguese or Spanish. The languages are very close at that particular moment. So, yeah. So I would say look for those archives. Okay. Look for them. They should be somewhere. And they should be also, these archives could be in all those libraries in Europe, because they took them all with them. But when they left the colonial powers, because they know the power and the importance of archives, which I think the Goan archives don't know, that they have important documents and that they should preserve them. This is a critique. I'm
Okay, Ines, this can be the last question. It is from Sinu Rose. The Portuguese had followed a pattern of the appropriation of sacred and symbolic locations important for the native of Goa as a site for Christian edifices and buildings, both relating to the Islamic culture as well as to the Hindu community. What was the collective response towards the cultural appropriation? So basically, the question is about what was the response of the local people to the spread of Christianity in this area. I think so.
Well, I think that my talk said it all.
Yeah.
The guys in Kunkulim wanted to just kill those guys who took their symbolic and sacred locations. There was no other way that they, but ultimately, as I said in my talk, there are different ways how to preserve one's locality and one's sacred location. One of them is to convert a temple into the church and continue being and take the church as the kind of sacred site with longer history. So I don't know.
Okay. Okay, so I think we'll end it here. I request my colleague Vijay Ramdas to propose vote of thank. Varghese, you have something to say?
Yeah, Vijay is off, it seems. So I'll do the work on his behalf.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Professor Ines, for joining us, and of course, readily accepting our invitation to come here. Of course, there was some problem initially with the communicative setting, right? But we could manage that after a while. But your energy, enthusiasm, and powerful communication made it very, very enjoyable. And of course, with your dropping in your own language, this became much more communicative to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for everyone who joined us in this webinar. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Bye.
Thank you.